Hey, it's Beau Beery. I'm a multifamily broker in the Florida region, and today we're going to be talking about what landlords can do when tenants are not paying rent during a time there's a moratorium on evictions. And since I'm not an attorney, we have the pleasure of having Jack Ross, who is an attorney. Jack Ross is a board-certified civil trial attorney with Siegel Hughes Ross. He's based here in Gainesville, but has clients all over the place. This is the star of the stars, if you will. A lot of the big dogs go to Jack for representation. He represents landlords and sellers the most part, and I always go to Jack when I have questions and need help. And before I forget, I will be putting a link to reach Jack if you have any questions, need representation, down in the description on the YouTube channel, so please check him out. So Jack, thanks for being here.
Hi, Beau. Thanks a lot for having me. It's my pleasure. This is clearly a difficult time for all of us, including landlords.
You bet, man. So let me set the scene on how this came about. So I got an email from a customer, which I'll show you right now. Let me bring this up here and share it. I got an email from a customer with this issue. She says, "Hi, Beau, I was wondering with this eviction moratorium, have you heard what other landlords are doing about tenants that are not paying? I have 2 units that the tenants are getting money but not paying because when the governor said no evictions, they heard free rent," right? We've all heard that. "I feel that I am being unfairly treated due to this moratorium, as I am sure others do too. How can the government," I gotta move over my video because I can't see it. "How can the government tell me that I am not allowed to remove people who are not following their lease and reducing my income? There must be some recourse for landlords like me that are small and did not qualify for any of the government programs for reimbursement." So Jack, I'm sure you've gotten these emails. This is one of many that I have gotten. And with the exception of calling up Debo to come in and beat up on some tenants that we wish we could, but that would be illegal. Tell us what you're advising customers in this scenario.
Well, sure, Beau. It is a difficult situation that landlords face today. There are a number of things that we can do to alleviate the situation, although I regret to say I don't have a totally satisfactory solution.
Right.
And, I'm dealing with cases in the 8th Judicial Circuit of Florida where there has been a moratorium on evictions for failure to pay rent. Well, the first thing we need to note is that that is limited to evictions for failure to pay rent. If there have been other violations of the lease, the moratorium doesn't apply, and you can get an eviction, although I've found that you have to be very explicit with the judges and the clerk in making sure they understand that it does not involve a failure to pay rent. But what do we do if the tenant just refuses to pay rent? As the situation stands right now, at least in our circuit, the judges will not enter orders of eviction.
Right.
But we can file a lawsuit for damages and obtain a judgment for the amount of the rent that is due. And once we get that judgment, we can then enforce it. You can enforce it by garnishment. Many landlords at the inception of the lease get credit reports so they know what bank the tenant uses. They know what the tenant's job is. They can garnish the bank account.
Okay.
Or they can garnish wages. Now, there are some fairly severe restrictions on the garnishment of wages under federal and state law, but it's not impossible. The other thing that a landlord can do is to execute on the tenant's property. I suspect you'll get the tenant's attention fairly quickly if you have the sheriff go out and seize their automobile.
Right.
Again, that can be a cost. The sheriff's going to want several $100s to take that car and store it. Ultimately, that'll end up being paid by the tenant, but it's important that you realize that's going to be an upfront cost. That's how you go. But what I've found is that there are some people who just can't pay what they owe, but the majority of people who say I can't pay, what they're really saying is, I don't have the money left over to pay you after I've paid everybody else. That's more important for me to pay. So
true.
what I try to do is to get my clients somehow figure out some way to move up the list of priorities and become more important, let their debt be more important than some of the other debts that are being paid. And if you start garnishing bank accounts, garnishing wages, executing on cars, sometimes that'll push you right up the list of priorities. Now, the other thing to note is that you can get a judgment which authorizes a writ of possession, which is what you get when you evict, the time that the moratorium is eliminated. So you can have that judgment in your hand, and when the governor or the Supreme Court decides we can start issuing evictions again, you can take that right to the clerk, get your writ of possession, take it to the sheriff, and have the tenant out within a matter of hours or days. If the tenant knows you have that writ and are going to execute it immediately upon the moratorium, that may be an additional incentive to move you up the list of priorities, and they may start paying at that time.
Yeah, let me show that one screen you had.
Sure.
Kind of highlighting that. Maybe you can go over it.
Yeah.
Here.
What the court will do is enter a judgment which says the clerk shall issue the writ of possession after the suspension of its activity described in these administrative orders. Those are administrative orders of the chief judge and the Supreme Court. So once those orders are changed, you've got the judgment sitting right there, and it's just a matter of taking the writ to the clerk, getting the clerk to sign it, taking it to the sheriff, and the sheriff will be on the doorstep, removing the tenant promptly. You don't have to wait until the moratorium is lifted to start going through the eviction process and start filing the claim and doing all the things you need to do. And as I said, sometimes if the tenant knows, listen, hotshot, you don't pay me my rent, that moratorium's coming up, and the next day you're going to be out on your butt.
Right.
That may have an impact. It may not.
And do you and I talked about this, but is there any worry about, what if a bunch of landlords are being proactive and doing this so that when the moratorium is lifted, could there be so many in line that it could back things up several more weeks or a couple more months? Or do you think they're staffed enough where, the sheriffs can go out there if they need to and take care of business?
Beau, I have not heard talk among the legal community that this is a widespread action that people are taking.
Okay.
The backup, if there is one, is going to be at the sheriff's office. All the clerk has to do is sign the paper.
Gotcha.
If there's a backup, it'll be with the sheriff, and that could be several days. I doubt it will be several weeks.
Well, and is the issuance something the landlord can take without the sheriff and just post, or how does that do you have to have the sheriff for that?
Well, the landlord can take the writ to the tenant.
Okay.
And give it to the tenant and tell the tenant they've been ordered by the court to remove. But if they refuse to do so, there's nothing that the landlord can do. What the sheriff will do is literally come out, tell the tenant they have to move. They'll usually give them some time, probably a day, to get their stuff out.
Right.
And if they don't move, the sheriff then generally will just say, okay, physically force them out if necessary, and allow the landlord to change the locks and lock them out of the premises.
Yeah. I would think most of the time, though, just being able to serve the writ as a landlord and hand it to them should be proof enough that they'll leave. It's only in the instances in which someone's kind of holding themselves up in there, I would assume.
Mhm. I've never seen a situation where once the sheriff went out with the writ that there was more than a 24-hour delay in
Right.
getting the guy. The
Right.
sheriff will give them, they will generally give them a day to move their things out.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Won't kick them
reasonable.
out, make them leave all their stuff there. Now, there is one other thing to note in that regard, and that is that a commercial landlord has a lien on all of the property in the premises for payment of rent. And so in that situation, the sheriff will lock, if it's pled properly, if you've got the right order from the court, recognizing the lien, the sheriff will lock up the property and leave all the equipment and things in the premises.
Gotcha. Okay, good. Awesome. Anything else that you can think of, Jack?
Well, yeah, here's one other approach that some of my clients are using, and that is to try to negotiate with the tenant either a reduced rent in return for timely payment,
Okay.
or a delayed rent in return for partial payment. In other words, take a certain percentage. You pay me a certain percentage of the rent. You pay it on time. I'll forgive the rest. I know we're all going through hard times. I'm willing to forgive some percentage of your rent if it's paid on time. If the rest is not paid on time, that deal is off. The other thing some landlords have done is say, I will agree to a certain percentage of the rent now, and at some point in the future, when this problem is resolved and you're back at full capacity, you're going to make up that shortfall.
Right.
But again, that can be conditioned on timely payment of the rent, and for some commercial tenants, particularly, that may be an incentive to get them to make at least a partial payment.
Good deal. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, man. You're, as usual, you were the man with the answers. So I appreciate that. Thanks for being on this.
Well, thank you for this opportunity, Beau. I
Yeah,
appreciate it, and I hope this has been helpful to some of your viewers.
I hope so too. And guys, if those of you who are listening, if you've heard of other avenues to go that are legal, please comment below. And also, obviously, if you know some others who could use this video, please, first of all, like the video, share it with them, subscribe to my channel. I do everything regarding multifamily real estate. And thanks so much for taking a listen, guys.